Somewhere around 2 a.m., there's a moment most people never talk about. Your body is tired, but your mind won't stop. It circles the same thought, picks at the same wound, replays the same worry from 6 different angles. You've been there. You know exactly what I mean. And what almost nobody tells you is that this moment, the one you dread, is actually a door. Tonight I'm going to show you how to walk through it, using a practice Mary Magdalene taught only to the people she trusted enough to teach directly. She called the other side of that door the MONAD. Not a god with a face, not a figure in the sky, the silence behind your thoughts, the source before the source, the place everything split apart from. And she taught her closest students that the voice keeping you from it, the doubt, the noise, the 2 a.m. spiral, has a name too. The Archons, patterns of distortion whose entire job is to keep you disconnected from that silence. Here's the part that matters most. Archons don't get defeated. They starve. The moment you make direct contact with the MONAD, the way Mary Magdalene taught it, those patterns lose the only thing keeping them alive, your attention. That withdrawal is the exact moment Archons lose all their power. And by the end of this video, you'll know how to trigger it tonight. I'm not telling you this because it sounded interesting in a book somewhere. I've sat with this teaching. I've used it on my own worst nights when nothing else worked and something shifted. I can't hand you a spreadsheet proving it. I can tell you it's real work wearing symbolic language, and it works whether or not you understand the mechanics yet. So let's start where she started, with her. Most people only know one version of Mary Magdalene, the flattened, simplified version handed down through centuries of institutions that had every reason to shrink her. But in the esoteric tradition, she's remembered differently. She's remembered as someone who understood the architecture of the inner world. Someone who didn't just believe in spiritual truth. She moved through it, consciously, the way you or I might move through a familiar house in the dark. Here's my honest opinion, and I'll say it plainly. She was written small on purpose. Any tradition that centers direct, unmediated connection to the source, no priest required, no gatekeeper required, just you and the MONAD, is a tradition that threatens control structures. And control structures don't like being threatened. So her role got minimized. Her teaching got buried under safer, simpler narratives that fit neatly into institutions built on the idea that you need someone else standing between you and the divine. But esoteric lineages remember her differently. They remember her as a teacher of inner knowing. She didn't tell her students what to believe. She showed them how to feel their way back to the source directly, without translation, without a middleman softening or distorting the message along the way. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this video. So hold on to it, because everything that follows depends on you understanding that difference between belief and direct experience. Because what you're about to learn isn't a belief system. It's Mary Magdalene's practice. She is remembered across mystical circles as one of the clearest voices ever to carry it, passing it not through crowds, but through small, quiet groups of people she trusted enough to call chosen. Not chosen because they were special by birth, chosen because they were ready. Readiness, in her teaching, was the only currency that ever mattered. You're going to understand, by the end of this video, why that word, chosen, was never about exclusivity. It was about readiness. And if you're still watching, you already know which category you fall into. You wouldn't still be here otherwise. Let me not define the MONAD the way a textbook would, because that would kill the whole thing before it starts. Textbooks flatten everything they touch. Instead, let me describe it the way Mary Magdalene's students were taught to feel it, because feeling is the only real doorway in. You know that space right before a thought forms? That half second of pure quiet, before your mind labels anything, judges anything, worries about anything? That's the closest thing I can point you to. The MONAD isn't a being. It isn't a figure with a face, and it isn't waiting somewhere far away for you to earn your way toward it. It's the silence behind your thoughts, the source point before the source point, the unity that existed before anything split into you, and me, and this, and that. In the mystical cosmology Mary Magdalene taught from, the MONAD is the singular origin, the undivided one, before fragmentation, before distortion, before all the noisy multiplicity of the world we live in now. Everything else is an echo of that original unity, some echoes clearer than others, some so distorted they've forgotten where they came from entirely, mistaking the echo for the source itself. Here's what I believe, and I'll say it as my own conviction. Most of your suffering doesn't come from your circumstances. It comes from distance. Distance from that original quiet. The farther you drift from it, the louder the noise gets, the self-doubt, the comparison, the anxiety that has no clear source. This is exactly the distance Mary Magdalene taught her chosen ones to close, deliberately, at the one time of day their defenses were thin enough to let them. I won't pretend I understand the MONAD completely. Nobody does, that's the point. It's not meant to be grasped like a fact, filed away, and forgotten. It's meant to be touched, briefly, the way you touch cold water in the dark and feel more awake than you did a second before. That touch is what we're building toward tonight, and it doesn't require years of study to reach. It requires willingness and 5 quiet minutes. Now let's talk about the other side of this. The Archons. I want to be clear about how I'm using this word, because it's easy to turn it into something dramatic and fear-based, and that's not what I'm doing here. In the tradition Mary Magdalene taught, Archons were described as intermediary forces, patterns of distortion that stand between you and direct connection to the source. Here's how I actually think about them, in plain modern language. Archons are the patterns in your mind that keep you disconnected. That's the whole idea, stripped of drama, stripped of horror movie imagery, stripped of anything that would make you flinch instead of understand. The voice that says you're not ready. The loop that keeps you scrolling instead of sleeping. The doubt that convinces you your intuition is wrong and everyone else's opinion is right. The exhaustion that isn't physical, it's spiritual. The tiredness of being pulled in 50 directions by 50 different noises, none of which are your own voice, none of which ever asked your permission before moving in. That's an Archon pattern, not a demon under your bed. A pattern of control, distortion, and disconnection that runs quietly in the background of your daily life, feeding on your attention, your fear, your self-doubt. And here's my genuine belief. Those patterns aren't defeated by fighting them. You can't out-argue self-doubt. You can't outrun distraction. Every time you fight a pattern directly, you feed it more attention, and attention is the only fuel it has ever needed. The only thing that dissolves an Archon pattern is direct contact with the thing it's designed to keep you from, the MONAD. This is the exact piece of the teaching Mary Magdalene carried to her closest students. Not a technique for battling darkness. A technique for remembering light so directly that the darkness has nothing left to attach to. That's why the phrase, Archons lose all power, is an exaggeration. When the connection is real, there's nothing left for those patterns to feed on, and a pattern with nothing to feed on cannot hold its shape for long. Picture this with me for a moment. It's late. The kind of late where the world outside has gone almost completely silent, except for the occasional creak of old wood settling, or the soft hiss of a single flame. A small group sits close together, not because the room demands it, but because what's about to be shared demands closeness. No large gathering, no spectacle, just a handful of people who have already proven, through years of quiet devotion, that they're ready for something more than what the crowds outside were ever offered. Mary Magdalene sits among them, not above them. Her voice is low, almost a whisper, because this teaching was never meant to be shouted. It was meant to be felt, passed from one steady presence to another like a flame passed from wick to wick, losing nothing in the transfer. Close your eyes, she says, not to escape the world, to stop feeding it your attention for a moment. The room breathes together. She doesn't rush. She never rushes. Rushing, she has told them before, is just another Archon pattern wearing the mask of urgency. There is a place before your thoughts begin. You've touched it before, in moments you didn't even notice, right before sleep, right after a long cry, right in the stillness after fear passes. Call it the One, the Source, the MONAD. One of the chosen ones, a young woman with tired eyes, opens her mouth to ask a question, but Mary raises a gentle hand. Not yet. First feel it. Questions come after. Tonight, you don't analyze the door. You walk through it. She guides them through breath, long, slow, unhurried, and through a quiet, internal call, not a chant for others to hear, but a whisper meant only for the space behind their own ribs. A remembering, not a request. A turning inward, not a shouting outward. She reminds them, gently, that nothing outside this room needs to change for this to work. Only the direction of their attention needs to change. And in that room, something changes. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a held breath finally releases, the way a shoulder drops an inch without anyone telling it to. That's the moment I want to bring you into tonight. Not as a story you watch from the outside, as the exact practice you're about to do yourself in your own room tonight. You might be wondering why this has to happen at night specifically. Why not morning, when you're fresh and clear-headed, when the sun is up and everything feels a little easier to face? Here's my honest take. Night isn't powerful because it's mysterious. It's powerful because your ego is tired. During the day, your mind works overtime, defending your image, managing your responsibilities, performing for people who may not even be paying attention, running calculations about how you're perceived that never actually finish. By night, most of that armor has quietly dropped, whether you notice it or not, the same way your shoulders drop after you finally sit down at the end of a long day. Mary Magdalene taught her students at night for exactly this reason. Not for atmosphere, for access. The Archons do their best work during daylight hours, when your attention is scattered across 100 small demands, and there's no room left to notice they're even there. The mind that spent all day defending itself has less energy left to defend itself against a moment of real stillness. The noise gets quieter, the walls get thinner, and in that thinner moment, connection to the MONAD becomes far easier to reach than it would be at noon, surrounded by every distraction daylight has to offer, and every Archon pattern that distraction feeds. I do this practice most nights, right before sleep, when my thoughts are already slowing down anyway. I'm not fighting my mind for space. I'm working with the rhythm it's already falling into, the way you'd step onto a moving walkway instead of fighting your way across a crowded floor. That's the real secret behind the timing Mary Magdalene chose. It's not mystical because of the darkness outside. It's effective because of the quiet that finally shows up inside, a quiet the Archons can't operate in and daylight almost never allows. This is also why the practice fails for people who try to force it at the wrong hour. Trying to reach the MONAD mid-scroll, mid-meeting, mid-noise, is like trying to hear a whisper standing next to a jet engine. The whisper hasn't changed. Your ability to hear it has. Night removes the jet engine. Here it is, the part you've been waiting for. This is the exact structure Mary Magdalene gave her chosen ones, and I'm laying it out plainly, because this is the practice, not a suggestion, not a rough sketch for you to improvise around. I'm not going to dress it up or make it sound more complicated than it is, because complication was never the point. Simplicity was always the point. That's what made it so easy to carry forward, whispered from one generation to the next, without losing anything in the retelling. Understand this first. It's not a spell. It's not a formula you perform and wait for results like ordering something online, checking a tracking number, refreshing a page until it arrives. It's remembering a language you already speak but forgot you knew, the way a word sits on the tip of your tongue for a moment before it surfaces on its own. This is how she taught it to be done, step by step, exactly as it was passed down, and I want you to treat it with that same care instead of rushing past it the way you'd scroll past most things tonight. Lie down or sit somewhere quiet, somewhere your body can fully relax without needing to hold itself up or perform for anyone. It doesn't need to be a special room. It doesn't need candles or incense or anything borrowed from an aesthetic you saw somewhere else. It just needs to be a place where nobody is asking anything of you, even for a few minutes. Close your eyes. Let your breath slow naturally, without forcing it into any particular rhythm, without turning it into another task to get right. 3 to 4 slow breaths and your body starts to settle on its own, the way a glass of water stops rippling once you stop touching the table it's sitting on. Then turn your attention inward, past your thoughts, past the noise of the day, toward the quiet space before thought. You are not thinking your way there. Thinking is exactly what got you tangled in the first place, exactly where the Archon patterns like to keep you, circling the same worry until it feels bigger than it actually is. You are feeling your way there instead, the same way you'd feel your way to a light switch in a dark room you know well, without needing to see it to find it, trusting your hand more than your eyes for a moment. Once you feel a sense of stillness, you make the call. Internally, without force, turn your attention toward the source and hold this intention. I return to the one behind all things. I remember what is true beneath the noise. This is the phrasing Mary Magdalene used with her students, passed down exactly as it was spoken in that room, word for word, generation after generation. You don't need to alter it. You don't need to search for your own words, or worry that you're saying it wrong, or wonder if some other phrasing might work better for you personally. This is the call, and it works because it is direct, not because it is decorated. And directness is exactly what the Archons cannot answer. They thrive on complication, on second-guessing, on the endless editing of a thought before it's ever allowed to land. This call skips all of that entirely. Hold that attention for a few minutes. Not with tension, with softness. You are not straining towards something far away, reaching for a shelf just out of grasp. You are settling into something that was never actually distant to begin with. It was only forgotten. The way a language learned in childhood is never fully lost, only buried under years of not using it, waiting quietly for the moment you finally speak it again. I'll tell you honestly what happens for me. Some nights, a deep, unusual calm arrives, like exhaling a breath I didn't know I was holding all day. Other nights, something loosens, like a knot behind my chest untangling slightly, one loop at a time, without any dramatic announcement that it's happening. I don't chase the dramatic experiences. I show up, consistently, exactly as she taught it, and let whatever happens, happen, without grading the night against some standard of how spiritual it's supposed to feel, without turning even this into another performance to get right. That consistency is what builds the connection. Mary Magdalene never taught this as a one-time ritual, something you do once and check off a list, then set aside like a finished task. She taught it as a nightly return, the same door opened again and again until walking through it stops requiring any effort at all. And the Archon patterns waiting on the other side of that door get a little weaker each time, a little quieter, a little less able to hold the shape they once held so easily. So what actually happens to those Archon patterns? The doubt, the distraction, the disconnection, when you do this consistently night after night without skipping? Here's my belief, stated plainly. They don't get destroyed in a dramatic battle. They lose their food source instead, which is quieter but far more permanent. Every one of those patterns survives on your unconscious attention. Self-doubt survives because you feed it worry. Distraction survives because you feed it your restlessness. Disconnection survives because you never pause long enough to notice it's there in the first place, running in the background like an app you forgot was open. When you make direct contact with the MONAD, the way Mary Magdalene taught, you pull your attention out of all those feeding loops, one at a time, night after night. Patterns that don't get fed don't disappear instantly, but they begin to starve immediately, the moment your attention stops flowing toward them. This is the real meaning behind the phrase, Archons lose all power when you call. It was never about defeating an external enemy standing between you and the divine, some being you need to battle in single combat. It was always about withdrawing your attention from patterns that only ever survived because you didn't notice you were feeding them. Mary Magdalene understood this mechanic completely, and she built her entire teaching around it, night after night, generation after generation of chosen students. I felt this shift myself, not as a lightning bolt, as a slow, steady loosening, a grip on my chest relaxing over weeks, not seconds. The anxious voice doesn't vanish overnight, but it gets quieter. It gets less convincing. It starts sounding less like the truth and more like background noise you've simply stopped listening to. And you realize you're spending far less energy fighting it because it has less power to fight with, because you finally stopped handing it the fuel. That is the real power in her teaching. Not a war won in one dramatic night, but a war that quietly stops being necessary at all, because there's nothing left on the other side of it demanding your energy. You might be asking yourself, if Mary Magdalene's teaching is so effective, why isn't it everywhere? Why did it stay so quiet for so long, passed only between small circles instead of shouted from every rooftop? Here's my opinion, and I want to be clear that this is interpretation, not proven history. Teachings that offer direct, unmediated access to the source are inconvenient for any structure built on being the required middleman. If people can reach the MONAD on their own, quietly at night, in their own room, they need fewer external authorities telling them how to feel connected to something greater than themselves, fewer institutions standing between the individual and the source. That's not comfortable for systems built on dependency. So Mary Magdalene's teaching got pushed to the margins, passed quietly between small groups, remembered in oral traditions and mystical circles rather than shouted from platforms. Not because it was false, because it was inconvenient to certain kinds of power. I believe that's exactly why you're encountering it now, in this specific moment, on this particular night. Hidden teachings don't stay hidden forever. They resurface exactly when enough people are finally ready to actually use them instead of just admiring them from a distance, treating them like folklore instead of instruction. It's not an accident that you're watching this tonight, of all nights, scrolling to this exact video instead of 1,000 others. Let's go back to that word, chosen. I don't want you to hear that word and think it means special bloodlines or secret elite status or being born different from everyone else, set apart before you ever had a say in the matter. That's not what it meant when Mary Magdalene used it, and that misunderstanding has kept a lot of people from stepping into practices exactly like this one, convinced the door was never meant for them. Being chosen never meant being picked out from a crowd by some external force. It meant choosing yourself to remember. Choosing to sit in stillness when it would be easier to scroll. choosing to turn inward when the whole world is built to pull your attention outward. Every app and notification competing for the same finite attention the MONAD is asking you to reclaim. The same attention the Archons have been quietly living on all along. Choosing the quiet call over the loud noise, night after night, even when nothing dramatic seems to happen right away, even on the nights it feels like nothing at all is happening. That's the entire criteria Mary Magdalene used. Not talent, not lineage, not luck, willingness. Just willingness, offered consistently, one quiet night at a time, one small withdrawal of fuel from the Archon patterns that had been feeding on it for years. If you're still here, watching this all the way through, past the part where a casual viewer would have clicked away, you've already met the only requirement that ever mattered to her. So here's what I want you to do tonight. Not tomorrow. Not when you get around to it. Tonight, when the house goes quiet and your mind finally starts to slow down on its own, take 5 minutes. Lie down, breathe slowly, and turn your attention inward past the noise toward the quiet place before thought. Make the call, exactly the way Mary Magdalene taught it, word for word, without changing it into something more comfortable or more familiar. Not to prove anything to me, or to anyone else, or even to yourself. Just to close the distance for 5 minutes, the way she taught her chosen ones to close it, one quiet night at a time. You don't need anything else to start. Not the perfect room, not a clear mind, not a good day behind you. Just the willingness to lie still and mean it. The same willingness that was the only requirement she ever asked of anyone. Mary Magdalene's teaching survived in whispers for a reason. Tonight, it's not a whisper anymore. It's yours. Now let me be honest with you. YouTube has completely demonetized this channel to sanitize your mind. They're uncomfortable with this knowledge reaching people. I'm not backing down for the sake of advertisers. If anything, this makes me push harder. But I cannot carry this alone. I need your support to keep this mission alive. If something in this video landed, if it cracked something open, click the link below in the description and join me on Patreon right now. Inside, you'll get harder, unfiltered, esoteric member-only breakdowns, private audio sessions, and material they don't allow me to publish on this platform. Most people will keep scrolling and forget this within the hour. I know you are not most people.